In the flickering gloom of the saloon's shadowed corner, a solitary woman stood, her gaze steady but burdened, catching whispered judgments like dust in the dry air. Eyes sharp with suspicion tracked her every movement, their silent accusations hanging heavier than the desert sun outside. Whispers swirled, rumors of blood and exile, a past she dared not speak aloud. Her hands clenched at her sides, trembling, not from fear, but from the relentless weight of being the outcast amid familiar faces. Around her, the rancid scent of spilled whiskey mingled with the stale smoke that clung to wooden beams. The heavy, worn floorboards creaked beneath restless boots, punctuating the tension. Murmurs rippled through the crowded room, punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses, or the low rumble of a battered piano. Frontier town seemed to hold its breath, the heat of suspicion almost tangible. She felt the weight of isolation settle deep in her bones, an invisible barrier, forged by silent judgment and savage misunderstanding. Her heart pounded, a fierce rhythm, echoing the chaos of unspoken fear and resilience. This was her life, a woman alone, living under the relentless gaze of a community that neither welcomed nor fully condemned her, but judged without mercy. Then, cutting through the murmurs, like a gunshot in the night, the feared pistolero stepped forward. His silhouette was carved from legend, ruthless eyes that had seen too many sunrises, fingers twitching near the ready holster that had ended more than one fate at the edge of a six-shooter. The room, thick with tension, tossed like a storm on the verge of breaking. His reputation preceded him, swift justice, merciless hand, and now all eyes shifted from the woman to him. Without hesitation or whisper of doubt, his voice rang clear and raw amid the hushed confusion. He claimed her as his Apache wife. The saloon's din dissolved into a suffocating silence, broken only by the scrape of chair legs and strangled gasps. This declaration shattered the fragile veil of prejudice, a spark poised to ignite a powder keg of fear, defiance, and unspoken truths. The woman's breath caught. For a moment, the hardened exterior faltered, flashing vulnerability beneath her defiant composure. Bound by this sudden bond, they stood as an anomaly in a town divided by suspicion and unyielding laws. His brutal notoriety collided with her stigmatized identity, entwining two worlds otherwise destined to clash. Across the room, the murmurs twisted into sharp whispers. Eyebrows arched in disbelief, jaws tightened in grim disapproval. Some leaned forward, eyes burning with challenge. Others receded, fear threading their movements. The fragile peace was fracturing, lines drawn in the dust and air, waiting to be crossed. The pistolero's steady gaze met hers once more, a silent vow amid the gathering storm. The saloon had transformed into a crucible, a stage where loyalty and danger danced precariously. Every breath, every glance, every heartbeat pressed toward an uncertain fate. Would their unexpected union be a shield or a powder keg destined to spark a deadly reckoning none could escape? And then, just as the tension thickened to its breaking point, the saloon's swinging doors creaked open, revealing a figure whose shadow foretold a deeper, unseen threat lurking just beyond the room's dim light. Many wandering souls following our frontier legends told us the fates, or the cunning YouTube algorithm, sometimes silently undo their subscriptions. Before the next perilous trail reveals itself and a new twist unfolds, take a quick look below the video and make sure you're still signed up with our band of storytellers so you won't lose the thread of this tale. Don't miss any voices echoing through this dusty valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The saloon's heavy doors swung open wider, and a tall figure stepped into the smoky haze, his presence slicing through the thick tension like a blade. The newcomer's silhouette was rough-hewn and imposing, shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, eyes sharp as flint, catching the dim light. Movement rippled instantly through the crowd as the stranger's gaze settled on the woman and the pistolero, now bound by that explosive declaration. The woman's breath hitched, fingers stiffening at her sides, as the heavy silence was shattered by the newcomer's low, deliberate voice. "I've been looking for you." His words hung in the air, weighted with a promise of reckoning, and the faintest hint of recognition that stirred an almost forgotten dread. The pistolero's hand brushed toward his holster, muscles taut, but the woman stepped forward, a sudden steel in her voice, stopping him before he could draw. "We don't want trouble," she said, though her eyes betrayed the coil of unease tightening in her chest. "Trouble finds you, whether you invite it or not." The stranger replied, stepping closer, boots thudding on the wooden floorboards. The murmur in the room thickened, drawing sharp breaths and guarded glances. Every heartbeat thudded louder in her ears as the stranger's gaze locked onto the pistolero, his stare cold and calculating. The woman's mind raced. This stranger was no wandering drifter. There was intent in his approach, a cold purpose that unsettled even the pistolero's infamous calm. Who was he, and why did his arrival twist the knots of fear tighter? "I'm here because of her," the stranger finally said, his voice low but fierce. "Because she's got something that belongs to me." The pistolero's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. "You got one chance to say what you mean, or this ends in lead," he warned, voice a hard edge cutting through the room's growing tension. The woman stepped between them, heart pounding, her voice steady despite the storm gathering in her throat. "If you want what belongs to me, you'll have to go through both of us." The newcomer's eyes flickered with something unreadable, a flicker of respect, maybe, or amusement. Brave words, or desperate. As the seconds stretched, the crowd edged back, sensing the fragile peace slipping through their fingers. The woman's gaze dropped briefly, flashes of a secret wound beneath her defiant facade. Shadows of betrayal and loss she buried deep. Suddenly, a tense silence was shattered. At the far end of the saloon, a whisper of movement stirred. The door creaked again, but unlike before, this arrival carried a weight that pressed on the room like a gathering storm. The community's whispered judgments seemed to pale beside the shadow now looming in the doorway. Not just one enemy on the horizon, then, the pistolero muttered, eyes darkening with a warning. The woman's breath shortened, pulse hammering against ribs like a desert storm. She could feel the old scars burning beneath her skin, memories too tangled and raw to voice. This stranger, she realized, could tip the precarious balance they fought to hold. Tensions curled like smoke through the air. Side glances sharpened into challenges. Hands hovered near weapons, and fear gripped even the bravest hearts. The woman took a slow, measured breath, letting the weight of this moment settle. She looked to the pistolero, a silent question passing between them. Could they survive what was coming, bound by a shared fate neither had chosen? "Tell me," the newcomer said, stepping forward, "what you're hiding back there, why you fled, because I'm not the only one hunting." Her eyes flashed like embers. The room's murmurs hushed, waiting for the tale that might either doom or save them. But her voice held no hesitation. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you have to become the hunted to find the truth that sets you free." The pistolero's hand finally relaxed, though his gaze never wavered from the stranger. A fragile alliance between them held by threads woven from necessity and danger. Out of the corner of her eye, the woman caught the shifting shadows behind the newcomer, a movement too subtle for most, but unmistakable to her. Shapes that belonged neither fully to this land, nor to the old ways, creeping closer. A cold chill swept through the saloon, despite the desert heat, and the woman's heart clenched. The frontier was no stranger to ghosts, but the ones gathering now brought a darkness far deeper than mere superstition. Her voice dropped to a whisper, half to herself, but strong enough to carry across the tense silence. "This town's about to learn what it means when the past won't stay buried." The newcomer's jaw tightened. "Then let them come." As the wind rattled the windows and the murmurs turned to uneasy stillness, the saloon became a crucible where fate would be forged anew. And in that suspended breath, as eyes locked, and the room held its last measure of quiet before the storm, the woman's gaze sharpened, and she whispered the words that sealed the night's destiny. "They're already here." The saloon's atmosphere thickened, heavy and charged, as the whispered hint of "they're already here" sank deep into the air. The woman's eyes darted toward the doorway, where the newcomer stood, a silent sentinel between the past and the peril stalking them tonight. The shadows trailing behind him seemed to stretch longer, darker, as if the night itself conspired with those unseen threats closing in. The pistolero's hand stayed taut at his holster, but his gaze sharpened like a hawk sizing up prey. His voice cut through the tension as he murmured, "Whatever ghosts chase her, they just brought their whole damned pack with them." The crowd held its breath, shadows flickering under the dim lanterns, unable to tear away from the brewing storm. The woman swallowed past the lump in her throat, her mind a whirlwind of memories she hid deep beneath grit and resolve. Years spent running from whispers worse than bullets. Now, with the pistolero's unlikely vow around her neck and this stranger's chilling entrance, the fragile threads holding her shelter were unraveling fast. Her fingers curled, knuckles white, and without looking away from the stranger's narrowed eyes, she spoke with steady conviction. "They come for more than me, for what I carry inside, truths some want buried with the dead." A hush rippled through the crowd. The weight of her words stretched the silence taut, like a gun waiting to be fired. The newcomer's lips curled into a grim smile, those flint-like eyes studying her as if weighing a promise. Truths are heavy, and some pay dearly just for carrying them. His gaze flicked to the pistolero, an unspoken challenge hanging between them. You'll need more than your quick hands if you mean to protect her. The pistolero stepped closer, his stance unyielding. Nobody's getting what they came for, not on my watch. His voice was gravel, edged with danger, a warning as cold and unforgiving as the desert night. From the periphery, fragments of quiet murmurs rose again. Eyes shifted anxiously. Some sought weapons beneath coats. Others exchanged glances carved from fear and defiance. The room had transformed from a gathering of wary strangers into a crucible where alliance and enemy blurred beneath a horizon clouded with past sins. The woman's gaze softened, even as shadows flickered behind. Her ghosts of memories etched in scars that no sun could erase. Her voice, low and raw, reached only him. There's a burden I carry, a secret that binds me to those shadows, and to what they're willing to destroy. The words fell like falling embers, fragile yet burning fierce. The saloon's wooden floor creaked again. Slow steps from the far end, barely audible, but instant and icy like a whisper of death. All heads twisted toward the sound, breaths held tight. The newcomer's fingers twitched near his belt, but his eyes never left hers. Your secrets don't just end here, he said quietly. They trail like a storm no one can outrun. I'm here to make sure you face what you've run from. His voice wove a cold promise, threading the room with dread. But I'm not alone. There are others, darker men, and they're not interested in talks or treaties. The woman's heart hammered a fierce drumbeat, muscles tensing like coiled steel. She exchanged a glance with the pistolero, their alliance awkward, forged in fire, but unbreakable in the face of shared peril. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the three of them, a fragile island surrounded by encroaching shadows. Behind the newcomer, slight movements hinted at figures lurking beyond the lamplight, silhouettes shifting like smoke slipping between cracks. The wild breath of the desert wind pushed against the door's frame, rattling hinges and carrying with it a scent of dust and danger. Her voice dropped so low it was barely more than a hiss, yet carried weight enough to still the restless murmurs. Whatever comes, they won't take what's mine without a fight. Her eyes burned with a fierce light, the defiant flame of someone who had stared into the edge of oblivion and refused to blink. The pistolero nodded, voice husky and grim. Then we'll give 'em a fight they'll never forget. A tense beat passed. The charged silence before a storm breaks over the land. And then the sharp, metallic clang of iron boots on wood echoed from beyond the swinging doors. The wind howled through cracks in the walls like a beast unleashed. The crowd shrank instinctively back, eyes wild with dread as heavy footsteps approached. The woman's mouth tightened as she took a step forward, silhouette rigid, pulse racing. A shadow detached itself from the gloom. A figure bulked in outlaw's leather and fading ceremonial beads, an ominous emblem of the past coming to claim its reckoning. The newcomer's eyes narrowed, voice barely steady but sharp as a knife. They're tracking her across every trail. from blood-sworn enemies to those who would sell their own to survive. He spat the words bitterly. And tonight marks the crossing, a reckoning long overdue. The pistolero's jaw clenched, his hand resting now just above the grip of his gun. Let 'em come. They'll find this town ain't big enough for their hate. A silence, like death's own breath, filled the saloon as the outsider stepped fully into the flickering light. A slow, cold smile tugged at the woman's lips beneath the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions, and the unsaid scars that bound her to the wild, merciless frontier. Her voice cracked, but held steady, a whisper that resonated with all the fury and pain simmering beneath her calm. They won't just take what's mine. They'll tear apart everything we've fought to keep alive. The pistolero stepped beside her, ready to face the gathering storm at her side. Outside, the restless wind howled through the desert night, the prelude to a battle older than the town itself, one that would test the strength of their bond and the limits of survival. And as the saloon's shadows faltered under the encroaching darkness, the woman's eyes locked on the approaching silhouette, and she spoke the words that would echo in the silence before the chaos. We have no choice. It's time to draw the line. The heavy doors creaked once more, swinging wide to reveal not just an enemy, but a tide of vengeance that none could outrun or deny. The saloon's air tightened, thick with shadows that seemed to breathe alongside the whispered warning, hanging silent and sharp. They're already here. Every eye fixed on the doorway, where the newcomer stood, stoic and unyielding, amid the murmur of gathered risks and whispered dangers. His presence was a weight, dragging the room deeper into the cold crawl of twilight unease. The pistolero's fingers tensed at his holster, muscles coiled like a rattlesnake ready to strike, yet his gaze never left the woman beside him. She stood resolute, her breath steady, despite the raging storm coiling like fire beneath her calm. Past anguish and distant betrayals flashed behind her steady green eyes, scars invisible yet raw. Now, those shadows breathed close, crawling in on the fragile line between tonight's fight or surrender. Whatever specters trail that woman, the pistolero growled low, barely more than a harsh breath. They dragged their whole damned pack with them. A murmur skirted the edges of the heavy silence, the kind of wordless dread that anchors itself deep in bone and muscle. The woman swallowed hard, jaw clenched tight, knowing every second dragged her closer to a reckoning she'd fled for so long. The uneasy alliance, forged between her and the pistolero, stood on the brittle edge of survival, balanced by necessity and a shared storm of past demons. My secrets aren't just shadows to hide from, she said, voice low, ringing with the fire of buried truths. They're chains that bind me, and a burden others would kill to bury with me. A hush rippled through the saloon. Lanterns flickered, reflecting split seconds caught between hope and despair. The stranger's hard eyes scanned her, weighing unspoken promises and threats. Heavy truths, he said, voice edged like razor wire. They come with a price, a reckoning no one escapes. The pistolero shifted forward, voice a low, guttural oath. Nobody's taking what's hers. Not tonight. His words cracked the tense stillness like a gunshot in the desert night. Eyes darted, shadows lengthened, and hands moved restlessly near worn leather belts and cold metal. The saloon had transformed into a crucible where ancient grudges whispered alongside fresh fear and fragile hope. Through flickering lamplight, the woman's gaze softened for a breath, an ember of something almost forgotten. "There's a truth I carry," she murmured to no one but the stones and dust beneath their feet. "A secret wound laid bare beneath years of silence. It's why they hunt me, why the past bleeds into this town tonight." From the far corner, the faint creak of weathered floorboards broke through the stagnant air. Eyes snapped toward the sound, shadows moving too slow to be unnoticed. Fingers brushed gun grips, waiting, anticipating. The newcomer's gaze sharpened, dark and calculating. Your past doesn't keep to whisper and shadow. It storms forward, dragging debts and devils alike. Her chest rose and fell with a deliberate rhythm, matching steps of courage and fear, melded in hard resolve. Looking to the pistolero, a silent pact pulsed between them, tangled threads of trust spun quick beneath the gathering threat. "Face what you fled," the stranger demanded, "because the running ends here. I'm not the only one on your trail. And they're coming hungry." A chill crept through the saloon, thick as desert fog. Figures cloaked in dusk gathered just beyond the doorway's threshold, half ghosts in leather and desperation. The night leaned in, the desert wind, cutting sharp through cracked window panes, carrying dust and danger on its breath. Her voice dropped to a fierce whisper, carrying the weight of storms past. "They won't take what's mine without a fight. This isn't about survival alone. It's about what we've fought to keep alive. And I won't let it slip through my fingers again." Beside her, the pistolero nodded slow, eyes fire dark. "Then we'll make sure they're taught a lesson they don't forget." The saloon held its breath before the sound struck like rattling chains. Heavy boots met wood with iron certainty. The door creaked wider. Shapes emerged, rough and raw from the desert night. Men who carried blood debts and shadows older than the town's dusty bones. Their eyes burned with vengeful fire and cold calculation. The woman's jaw tightened, heart pounding like war drums beneath quiet skin. The stranger's voice cut clear through the rising storm. "They've traced her through blood and betrayal, sworn enemies and traitors alike. Tonight's the reckoning." The pistolero's hand hovered near his gun, voice rough steel. "Let 'em come. This town ain't big enough for their hate." As the saloon's light flickered over the gathering silhouettes, the woman's steady voice broke the gathering dark like a promise and a warning wrapped in tired defiance. "They won't just take what's mine. They'll tear apart everything we've tried to hold together." Side by side, the woman and pistolero stood framed in the flickering lamplight, two storms ready to collide or merge, uncertain of which, yet unyielding still. Outside, the desert wind howled its lonely cry, the eve of a war born from secrets and scars too deep for easy forgiveness. And with eyes locked on the advancing shadows, the woman whispered, voice sharp and unflinching as a drawn blade, "Tonight the past crosses the line, and none of us will walk away unscarred. The woman's whispered words hung in the dense saloon air, erasing all pretense of calm. They're already here. A shiver passed through the crowd as shadows behind the newcomer lengthened, darkening the threshold like creeping tides. The silence fractured, replaced by the restless shift of feet and the tightening grip of concealed hands over worn leather. The pistolero's scarred fingers twitched near his holster. His gaze was a razor, slicing the gloom for any sign of the advancing threat. He swore beneath his breath. Hell's teeth, they brought everything with them. His voice was soft, but every ear caught the menace there. Beside him, the woman steadied herself against the surge of impending disaster. Her eyes flickered, tracing the outline of the newcomer's form, half-shadowed but unyielding. Every muscle coiled in that precarious moment between fight and flight. The weight of years spent fleeing now crashed down, cold and relentless. The past clawing its way back with teeth bared. The stranger's gaze locked with hers, sharp and unflinching. "I'm here because of her," he said. "Because what she carries isn't just a secret. It's a reckoning waiting to burn." The woman's breath caught, tight and rough, but her voice did not falter. "If you want that, you'll have to go through us both." She stepped closer to the pistolero. Their uneasy bond, forged by necessity, now a living thing, pulsing in the charged air between them. A murmur cracked through the tavern. Some leaned forward, eyes burning with dread and resolve. Others retreated, shadows behind their backs growing longer with fear. The saloon, once a haven of whispered judgments, had become a crucible where loyalties would be tested by fire. The newcomer's lips twitched into a sharp smile, one edged with grim amusement. "Brave words," he said, "or desperate?" Out beyond the heavy swinging doors came a low, rhythmic clatter, the metallic thud of iron boots pressed against worn wood. Heads snapped toward the sound, breaths catching before release. From the corners of the room, cautious glances flicked over shoulders as figures, cloaked in night and dust, slipped closer, each step a promise of reckoning. The woman's gaze hardened, shadows of old wounds flickering beneath the surface. "They come from more than me. For what lies beneath," she said quietly, voice raw with the weight of unspoken truths. Truths some would kill to keep buried. The pistolero's jaw clenched. "And I swear, no one's taking her, no matter the cost." The newcomer shifted, eyes narrowing like a hawk, sizing vultures circling overhead. "You'll need more than fast draw and stubborn grit if you mean to stand." His voice dropped, haunted. "There's blood coming, a storm older than this town, and none of it's seeking mercy." A slow wind whispered through cracks in the saloon walls, carrying dust and an acrid scent that made the room creak and pulse with something almost alive. The crowd pressed tighter, breaths held in silent prayer or anticipation. The woman's fingers curled into fists, white-knuckled and steady. "I carry a burden," she said, voice trembling with bitter resolve. "A darkness chained to my past, and now it's breaking loose." The footsteps outside quickened. A harsh scrape sounded. On the floorboards, as one silhouette stepped into the frame of flickering lamplight, tall, broad, draped in outlaw leather and worn ceremonial beads, that spoke of histories neither forgotten nor forgiven. His face was shadowed, but eyes glinted with a cold hunger. The newcomer's voice cut through the thick silence, low and furious. They've traced her through blood debts and broken oaths. Sworn enemies, traitors willing to sell their own. This is no simple chase. It's a reckoning long overdue. The pistolero's hand hovered near the grip of his gun, his voice rugged as granite. Let 'em come. They'll find this town isn't wide enough for their hate. Outside, the desert wind screamed, rattling the saloon's gutters like the breath of death itself. Inside, the tension snapped tighter, an invisible noose, drawing all toward the edge of inevitable confrontation. The woman met the outlaw's hard eyes, her voice a cracked yet fierce whisper. They won't just take what's mine. They'll rip apart everything we're barely holding on to. The pistolero moved beside her, his posture a storm-ready shield, a promise etched in muscle and scars. Their alliance, fragile, unspoken, stood as the last embers against a gathering dark. Behind them, the crowd stilled. Whispers died, and the only sound left was the sharp intakes of breath, the creak of weathered wood, and the distant howl of a desert wind that knew no mercy. The outlaw stepped further into the light, his gauntleted hand brushing a dusted pistol, eyes narrowing with cold certainty. This town's about to bleed for what's been buried, he said, voice grave and final. And no one will walk away clean. The woman's gaze sharpened, burning like a flare in the gathering gloom. Then we draw the line here and now. Her words fell like a gunshot, echoing in still air, a verdict sealed in fire and defiance. And as the saloon shadows stretched to swallow all light, the heavy doors swung shut with a thunderous finality, trapping them inside the storm. And beyond the threshold, the silence cracked with the promise of violence. The night held its breath. Then, from the darkness just beyond the locked door, a single chilling voice cut the silence like a blade. This is only the beginning. The weight in the saloon did not ease as the woman's whisper echoed. They're already here. Eyes darted to the shadowed doorway where the newcomer stood, a living boundary between what was and the menace tightening around them. The flickering lanterns could not dispel the dark tendrils creeping just beyond the light, swallowing edges of the room in anticipatory cold. The pistolero's fingers clenched nearer his holster, a slow predatory curl tightening his jaw. They didn't come empty-handed, he growled, voice low but edged with steel, and they brought their whole damned pack. His gaze was a hawk's, searing the gloom for the first sign of threat, unmoving even as the woman's breath caught beside him, heart hammering fierce rhythms against the cage of her ribs. The stranger's eyes never left hers, hard, unyielding flint, flashing with something once buried deep beneath years of grind and grit. I'm here because of what you carry, he said, voice dark as desert night. What some want buried with you. The words scraped across the silence like a whetstone on blade, promising reckoning. A brittle tension splintered the saloon's thick air. Patrons tightened their grips on mugs, and loaded weapons slowly revealed beneath dusty coats. The woman's gaze flickered past the stranger to the doorway, where shifting shadows throbbed with quiet menace. Figures cloaked in unforgiving dusk, waiting. "We don't want trouble," she said quietly, the steel in her voice belying the tremor of flame beneath her calm. "But if you want what's mine, you'll have to go through us both." She stepped subtly closer to the pistolero, their alliance forged in necessity, now a living brace against the impending storm. The stranger's lips quirking in a grim appreciation. Brave words, or desperate ones. His gaze sharpened, scanning the room as if weighing how far the embers of this night might spread. Then the saloon's second door, at the far end, creaked again. Slow, deliberate steps, each thud a hammer strike of doom that pulled all breaths tight. The newcomer's fingers twitched near his belt, muscles taut, yet his focus never wavered from the woman. "She's not running from just me," he murmured, barely audible, but seething with cold promise. "Others trail her, shadows darker than I am. They're not interested in parley or mercy." The woman swallowed hard, memories flashing behind her steady eyes, scars and secrets tangled in silence all these years. "There's more buried beneath my past than any town's dirt, and what hunts me wants it all." Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried, fierce enough to ignite dry tinder. "They won't take it without a fight." The pistolero shifted, the calloused strength in his limbs a rigid barrier between her and the gathering storm. "If they come, they'll meet a hell they weren't counting on." From the darkened corner, soft murmurs twisted tighter among the crowd, breaths held, fires quieting as the inevitable closed in. Shadows lengthened, warping under the flickering candlelight, something ancient, raw, and relentless drawing near. Suddenly, a lone silhouette stepped fully into the glow, a man cloaked in outlaw leather, his weathered hat dipping low over eyes that had watched too much death and betrayal. Beads faded and worn, draped about his frame, whispered of histories stitched in blood and broken oaths. The stranger's voice cut through the thick silence like a sharp blade, low and steady with bitter certainty. "They've hunted her across deserts, over bloodied trails marked by enemies and traitors alike. This is a reckoning long overdue." The pistolero's hand, heavy and sure, hovered just above the grip of his pistol. "Let 'em come," he growled. "They'll find this town ain't big enough for their hate." Outside, the chill wind tore through cracks in the walls, uneven as a dying man's breath. It rattled the saloon's rattling windows, a shriek caught in the night's throat. Inside, the tension pulled taut, an invisible noose wrapping tighter, drawing all eyes to the doorway of fate. The woman's gaze snapped to the outlaw, raw defiance blazing through the weariness, etched on her face. "They won't just take what's mine," she said, voice cracked but strong. "They'll rip apart everything we barely hold on to." Shoulder to shoulder, she and the pistolero stood, two storms about to collide or merge, neither knowing which, but both unyielding still. The crowd retreated into quiet, all whispers fading as the air thickened to the weight of unshed blood and unnamed fears. The outlaw shifted, dust catching in the lamplight as his hand brushed the worn leather of his pistol belt. "This town's about to bleed for secrets buried long and deep," he warned. voice grave and final. No one walks away clean from what's coming. A breath held too long, broke like glass, eyes locked, hearts hammered. Shadows danced on faces carved in grit and resolve. The woman's voice, sharp as a drawn blade, cut the heavy air. Tonight, the past crosses the line, and none of us walk away unscarred. The heavy saloon doors groaned as wind rattled them violently, sealing the room in a cage appointed by fate. Beyond the dark threshold, the stirring silence shattered with a single whispered sentence. This is only the beginning. The saloon's breath hung heavy as the newcomer's shadow pressed closer. The whispered warning still fresh as a wound. They're already here. Every eye pinched the dim threshold where light bled into dark, unease crawling along the walls like smoke. The woman's pulse throbbed in her throat. The pistolero's grip tightened ever so slightly on his holster, knuckles pale beneath. Worn leather. No one spoke, but the room vibrated with unvoiced fear and the electric hum of fate's cruel design. The stranger stepped forward, his presence slicing through the thick tension like a sharpened blade. His gaze locked on the woman, and then shifted to the pistolero, a cold flame igniting between them. "Whatever hunts her," he said, voice low and scalding, "didn't come alone. They brought the whole damned pack." The woman squared her shoulders, the steel beneath her defiant calm hardening into a shield. Years had woven scars tight beneath her skin, silent, jagged truths that no town's whisper could erase. Yet tonight, those past shadows were breathing, stalking through every flicker and whisper, unraveling the fragile threads that kept her from falling apart. "I carry a burden no one else can see," she spoke softly, words sharp as splintered bone. "A secret worth dying for, and they'll tear this place apart just to claim it." Her eyes locked with the newcomer. Flickering embers of old defiance and raw fear mingled there. The pistolero's gaze sliced through the thickening dark. "Not a soul's getting to her on my watch." His voice was ragged from past battles, but unyielding. A tense silence fell. The crackle of the saloon's lanterns, mingling with ragged breaths and the restless shift of wary hands, near holsters and knives, hidden beneath dust-covered coats. The air tasted of sweat, whiskey, and dust, each breath a measured gamble between life and the unknown. From the far corner, slow, deliberate footsteps pressed against creaking floorboards. Heads swiveled, eyes sharpened. The newcomer's fingers twitched nervously near his belt. Shadows peeled themselves from the darkness beyond the swinging doors, slow shapes cloaked in weathered leather and desperate resolve. A tall figure stepped into the wavering lamplight, a rough outline etched with age and hard miles. His hat shadowed eyes that glinted with cold fury and hard-earned wisdom. Beads of faded significance clinging around his neck like silent witnesses to a bloody history. The stranger's voice dropped, guttural and final. "They've hunted her across shattered trails and broken oaths, sworn enemies and traitors alike. This is more than a chase. It's reckoning come howling through the dusk." But Pistolero shifted, hand hovering just above the worn grip of his six-shooter. coiled like a rattlesnake unleashed. "Let 'em come," he spat low, gravel thick in his throat. "This town ain't big enough for their hate." The woman's breath hitched but didn't break. Her gaze locked on the stranger standing fully revealed, her voice carrying the brittle edge of reluctant surrender and fierce defiance. "They won't just take what's mine. They'll rip apart every bit of hope and home we barely cling to." Side by side now, she and the pistolero stood framed by flickering lantern light. Dueling storms tethered by necessity and shared danger, neither knowing yet if their furies would clash or forge something fierce and new. The crowd recoiled into shadow, silent as dust settling after a long, brutal ride. The outlaw's hand brushed a faded leather holster, the faint creak of worn leather, cutting through the silence as he fixed their trio, with hard eyes full of bitter resolve. "This town's about to bleed for secrets buried deep in dry earth and darker sins," he warned. "No one walks away clean from what's coming." The desert wind stole through cracked windows, rattling shutters, and carrying a sound like a warning cry, wild, scraping, relentless. Inside, the tension stretched tight, a noose around every heart in the cold saloon. The woman's pulse thundered, fierce and stubborn beneath cracked skin and weary bones. "Tonight, the past crosses the line, and none of us will walk away unscarred." Her words sank like a gunshot in the quiet, a verdict carved in flame and cold steel. The saloon's heavy, groaning doors slammed shut with a final, earth-shattering thud, locking them inside this crucible with the growing shadows pressing hard against their fragile stand. Outside, the still desert waited, silent, vast, and merciless. Then, slicing through the brittle silence from beyond the barred doors, a voice, low and cold, whispered with cruel certainty, "This is only the beginning." The saloon's heavy doors groaned as they swung wide, and the cold desert wind slipped in, carrying dust and distant whispers of a brewing storm. The newcomer's steady gaze never wavered from the woman and the pistolero, the unlikely pair now bound by a promise neither fully understood, standing like two survivors caught in the eye of a gathering tempest. The woman's breath was shallow, chest rising and falling, with a rhythm born of long nights spent running and hiding, shadows brushing her every step. Her fingers trembled lightly, less from fear than from the hard weight of the choice she had been forced into, to stand here, exposed, or to vanish once more into the unforgiving wilderness. The pistolero's hand remained poised near his holster, his own breath slow and deliberate, a calm mask hiding the storm beneath. His eyes flicked to the newcomer, narrowing with the cold calculation of a man haunted by more bloodshed than he cared to count. Every muscle was taut, silence hanging like the wire before the shot that decides a life. "I'm here for what she carries," the stranger said, his voice a low growl that seemed to carry the grit of desert sand and the bitterness of old grudges. Secrets some would kill to bury, truths tied to blood that won't dry. The woman's gaze flashed defiance, fierce and unyielding, as she took a step forward, shielding the space between the pistolero and the shifting darkness behind the newcomer. "You'll have to get through us both," she said, her voice steady, but thick with the ache of years spent fighting shadows. "Nothing you chase is yours without a fight." A fragile tension snapped tighter in the saloon. Eyes darted, some settling on swords hidden in worn sheaths. Others clenched fists barely held from weapons. Whispers died into a hush that cracked like dry twigs underfoot, everyone sensing the fragile peace was about to shatter. The newcomer's lips curved, a grim wound of a smile that spoke of desperate hope and cold certainty. "Brave words? Or maybe you're just desperate," he murmured, stepping closer, boots thudding. Soft but certain on the worn wood, shaking loose the dust of forgotten days. The woman's jaw clenched, eyes flicking to the doorway again, where the wind carried a chilling echo of footsteps. Unyielding, relentless, the march of men with centuries of hatred woven into their souls. Shadows moved like creeping ice, slow and cruel, folding the edges of the room into darkness no lantern could touch. "More are coming," the pistolero muttered, voice low and raw, "and none of them want words or peace." His hand finally tightened on the grip of his revolver, knuckles white beneath leather. The woman's heart hammered, memories rising like wildfire beneath her skin. Bitter truths and shattering losses threatening to crumble the fragile bond forged in desperation. She stepped fully into the light, meeting then Pistolero's gaze, the silent question heavy between them. Could two broken souls stand against the gathering night? "I'll hold them back, as long as I can," she whispered, the weight of that promise bending her shoulders, though her voice held steady with the fire of unbroken will. "But what lies behind those doors?" She let the words trail, letting the fear and resolve fill the empty spaces. The wind rattled the cracked windows, a howl swallowed quickly by the suffocating stillness that bent every neck towards the heavy doors. They creaked again, the slow, deliberate creaking of an unyielding fate, pushing forward without mercy. From the corner of the saloon, a faint shuffle echoed, a presence barely seen but deeply felt, a silent herald of the storm bearing down. The crowd pressed back, breath caught in anxious throats as cloven shadows began to spill through cracks and the flickering candlelight. The newcomer's words sliced through the charged air. "This isn't just about secrets or blood debts. They're here to end what you carry, and everything it means, past, present, future." The woman's eyes narrowed, hard and glowing with a fierce flame. All her defenses sharpened, every scar and secret a blade she wielded silently. "They won't find a broken spirit," she said, voice like cold steel cutting through the smoky haze. "They'll find a woman who's fought too long to fall now." The pistolero took a step beside her, his stance unyielding, shoulder set like granite. "And a town that ain't big enough for the hate trailing their boots," he said, voice gravelly with the weight of battles yet to come. The door groaned once more, wider this time. A cold shadow detached itself from the darkness, a tall figure draped in faded leather and dusty beads, eyes sharp and unreadable, the ghost of a past too heavy to bury. His footsteps rang through the saloon, each one a toll in the night's reckoning. "This town's about to bleed," the newcomer said, voice low, final. "And none of us walk away from that without scars." The woman's breath caught, fear and fury tangling like wildfire beneath her ribs. Yet she stood firm, meeting the approaching shadow with all the defiance left in her worn, stubborn heart. Her voice dropped to a whisper, harsh, unyielding, a vow and a warning wrapped in one final blade of truth. "Tonight, the line is drawn, and this time there's no turning back." The saloon's heavy air still clung to the weight of those final words. They're already here. Outside, the restless desert wind rattled the wooden shutters and stirred the dust in restless swirls, as if nature itself braced for the storm looming over Dry Creek. Inside, the woman and the pistolero stood shoulder to shoulder, faces carved in resolve and worn hard by years of silent wars. The tall outlaw, with his worn beads and cold eyes, stepped fully into the flickering lamplight, his survival etched in every line of his scarred face. Around him, shadows shifted as more figures pressed against the doorway's threshold. The saloon had become a crucible, every breath a fragile thread in a gathering tempest. The woman's voice, low and steady as the desert night, broke the tightened silence. "They're here for something buried deep, more than blood debts or broken homes. They want the truth I carry, the past no desert wind can erase." Her green eyes shimmered with a fire born from suffering and unyielding hope. "I've carried that burden longer than I wanted," she confessed, revealing for the first time the depth of the secret she'd fled. "Long ago, my family held a sacred trust, an ancient promise to protect a peace between their people and settlers, a fragile truce born in blood and respect." The pistolero's gaze shifted, absorbing the weight of her words, and that trust was shattered. He added without question, "By greed, fear, and lies." She nodded. "The peace tore apart, and so did everything I loved. I ran, not from guilt, but from the ghosts hunting me, those who still want to control what truth remains." Her hands clenched, knuckles paled beneath the faded leather of her coat, but her voice did not waver. "This town, this fight, it's the last stand for what that promise means." The outlaw tipped his hat, eyes narrowing in measured respect. "Your secret's blood and fire. We all bear scars no one sees. But tonight, the land itself remembers. It demands justice long denied." A sharp murmur rippled the room. Some townsfolk reached reluctantly for weapons hidden beneath coats. Others swallowed hard, pride and fear tangled in their throats. The fragile safety, once hugging Dry Creek, felt like it could snap at any moment. Outside, the wind carried the distant, rhythmic stomp of boots, a drum signaling that the pack was indeed breaking through the coming night. The woman and the pistolero exchanged a glance rich with shared understanding, silent promises forged by necessity and the shared storm of fate. "Whatever comes, we face it together," he said with gravel in his voice, knuckles brushing the grip of his revolver. "Not for glory, but to protect what's ours. The peace, the people, the promise." She breathed in, steeling herself, as the new moon cast long shadows through the saloon's dust-laden windows. Tonight, this valley will learn that the past doesn't die. It waits. And sometimes, the hunted become the hunters. Her words carved a fragile hope into the tense air, a lighthouse for those teetering on the edge of despair. The first figures breached the doorway, faces hard as broken stones, eyes cold and unyielding. The saloon's heavy doors slammed behind them, promising no easy retreat. As the intruders stepped forward, the lively murmur transformed into a thick silence, an unspoken acknowledgement that the reckoning had finally arrived. Gunmetal glinted, and raw nerves stretched taut under the flickering lamplight. The outlaw raised a hand, a signal rooted in blood-earned respect, and spoke with a voice both worn and steady. "We settle this now. No more running, no more hiding." The woman's heart pounded fiercely beneath a mask of unbroken will. Across the faces confronting them, she saw histories in anguish, pain, and a hunger for redemption tangled deep beneath layers of dust and broken dreams. Suddenly, a sharp crack broke the suffocating quiet. The pistolero's revolver spoke with a thunderous answer, sending a bullet into the empty space where an attacker lunged forward. The chaos unleashed was savage. Dust scattered, chairs crashed, and desperate shouts rippled through the stove-warmed shadows. But amid the violent tempest, her voice rose clear and unwavering, cutting through the din like a steel blade. "Hold the line! Remember what we stand for!" Side by side, the former outcast and the legendary pistolero became the storm's eye, their alliance unyielding. In every glance, every breath, the people saw hope rekindled, proof that scars and secrets might yet draw strength from shared pain and new beginnings. Hours passed, like drawn breaths, the battle fierce and unrelenting. When the dawn's first pale light bled across the horizon, Dust Creek stood battered, but unbroken. The invaders had been driven back, shattered by the fiery resistance, born of truth, courage, and bond. The woman stood at the saloon's doorstep, watching the sun rise over a land that still whispered of promises both broken and honored. The pistolero's arm came around her shoulder, silent, solid. "No longer the hunted," she whispered, eyes reflecting the blush of dawn. "We're the keepers now." He nodded slowly, his gruff voice softening for the first time in a long while. "And no pack will threaten what we've built here, not while we draw breath." Behind them, the townsfolk emerged from shelter, faces marked by loss but lit with newfound determination. The fragile truce the woman once carried now breathed again, reborn through sacrifice and a steadfast refusal to surrender. As a morning wind swept away the night's clinging shadows, the woman let her gaze drift over the valley's wide expanse. The desert, the hills, the horizon endless and pure. Past and future seemed to meet there, stitched tight by the choices forged in fire and blood. She drew a deep breath and sealed the final vow, barely audible but resolute. "This is our land, our truth, our future." And so, the saga of the woman, the pistolero, and the restless shadows faded into legend, not as tales of ghosts and fear, but as the enduring story of courage, redemption, and the fierce hope that even in the harshest deserts, new life can rise from the ashes of old wounds. The frontier held its breath and then exhaled, quietly brave, beneath the rising sun.